next speaker is Miss Lubabah Abdullah. Miss Abdullah is an attorney who specializes in family law, Islamic state planning, and family-based immigration. She has taught and lectured on Islamic inheritance, Islamic family law, and the intersection between Islamic law and United States civil law. Ms. Abdullah has served the Muslim community in Washington, D.C., Indiana, St. Louis, and also Houston. Ms. Abdullah has studied Islamic estate planning under Al-Azhar scholars. Her father, Sheikh Muhammad Noor Abdullah, is a well-known American Muslim scholar. So without further ado, Ms. Lubabah Abdullah.
السلام عليكم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. My name is Lubabah Abdullah and I am an attorney. And my focus today is going to be on Islamic estate planning. So wills and trusts for Muslim families. What does that look like? What should we be doing? What does Sharia tell us to do? And there we go. Okay, so overview of what we're going to cover. What is an estate? What is the importance of having an Islamic will? What are the basic requirements of an Islamic will? What is the importance of having a will under Texas law? What are the consequences if I don't have a will? What happens to my estate? What happens to my young children? What happens to me? And then we'll talk about trust and why doesn't people use it. And then the last thing we'll cover briefly is on awqaf or endowments and what the purpose has been under Islamic history, as well as what can it do for us in our Muslim communities today. So I know that's a whole lot of things. And so we'll be as quick as possible in our 20 minutes that we have together. So the first question is, what is an estate, right? We talk about Islamic estate planning. You've got to know, what is an estate? So an estate is everything that you own, right? It's all of your property, your entitlements, your obligations. So it's your land, it's any real estate that you might have. It's also any personal property, movable property that you have. Again, we are told in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah tells us, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتِ إِنْ تَرَكَ خَيْرًا الْوَصِيَّةُ لِلْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ حَقًّا عَلَى الْمُتَّقِينَ. It is prescribed for you, just like when Allah talks to us about Siyam in Surah Al-Baqarah, He talks about كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامِ, right? It was prescribed for you to fast during Ramadan. Likewise, Allah tells us it was prescribed for you if you are going to be approaching death, and if you have anything of value, that you have to leave a will in favor of your parents, your immediate family, with fairness. And this is an obligation of those who are mindful of God in Surah Al-Baqarah. Many ahadith that talk about, it's the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequest to not let 2 nights pass without writing about it, right? And then the hadith that scares me the most, a man may do good deeds for 70 years. And Abu Hurairah said it's 60 years. But if he asks unjustly when he leaves his last testament, the wickedness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the fire. If, on the other hand, a man acts wickedly for 70 years, but is just in his last will and testament, the goodness of his deed will be sealed upon him, and he will enter the garden. May Allah make us all of those. So again, who inherits under Islamic law? So the spouse always inherits. Parents always inherit. Children always inherit. If you don't have any one of those, then you go to the box, the light pink box, where your grandparents might inherit, where your siblings may inherit, aunts and uncles, children, paternal aunts and uncles. So it starts with those who are closest to you, and then it goes out as far as who inherits. Who does not inherit? So if you have a non-Muslim spouse or a non-Muslim child, they would be someone who would not inherit. You can leave them something in your wasiyah. You can leave them a bequest. Someone who kills either directly or indirectly someone who he inherits from, or people who die simultaneously in a car accident. Those are people who would not inherit under Sharia. How many verses in the Quran talk about Islamic inheritance? How many verses? There's a lot of verses in the Quran. How many of them do you think talk about Islamic inheritance? 3. There's 3 verses, verse 11, verse 12 in Surah Al-Nisa, and verse 176 in Surah Al-Nisa that came as a clarification to verse 12. So Allah starts off by telling us, God commands you regarding your children, the share of a male will be twice that of a female. If you leave only 2 or more females, their share is 2/3 of the estate. But if there's only 1 female, her share will be 1/2. So again, if you've got children, your son will receive double what your daughters receive. If you've got only daughters, one receives 1/2 of the estate. If there's 2 or more daughters, they share in 2/3 of the estate. A lot of times people are always like, why? That's not fair. As an American child, I was the first one that was always like, it's not fair. Why does my brother get double than me? And then I learned that your brother gets double than you because I, as a woman, do not have the expense of jihad. I do not have the expense of maintaining my family. I do not have to support my family. I have no religious obligation to support myself or my family, while my brother has that religious obligation, right? He will be asked by God, did you support your family? Did you support your parents? Did you support your siblings, right? Well, I do not have that obligation. So yes, I only get half of his inheritance, but my inheritance can go sit at my Amana mutual funds account, and that's all it has to do, while he has to spend on all of us. And again, the purpose behind Sharia is not elevated at aim at elevating one gender over another, but it is creating a stable and balanced society. And can you equalize the shares? Yeah, you can equalize the shares with the consent of all of the inheritors. The rest of verse 11 talks about spouses. Oh, it talks about parents first. Each parent is entitled to 1/6 if you leave offspring. So here, mom and dad receive the same thing. They each receive 1/6. But if you are childless and your parents are your only heirs, then your mother will receive 1/3. And then what's unstated is that your father will receive the balance. But if you leave siblings, then your mother will receive 1/6 after the fulfillment of bequests and debts. So again, your parents, if the deceased left children, mom and dad each receive 1/6. If there are no children, mom receives 1/3 and dad gets the balance. And if the deceased has brothers and sisters, mom gets 1/6 and dad gets the rest. Siblings do not inherit. Again, with the understanding that if something, God forbid, happens to the parents, who inherits? The siblings. The verse closes out by saying, be fair, your parents and your children, as you do not fully know who is more beneficial to you. This is an obligation from God. Surely God is all-knowing, all-wise. Again, when a person dies, all of your good deeds come to a halt, except for 3 things, right? Ongoing charity that you've left, beneficial knowledge, and a righteous child who will pray for you, right? You don't know who that righteous child is going to be. You don't know where that guidance is going to come from, when it's going to come from. So that child that might have given you gray hairs, I see you, Yusuf, might be the child that becomes the one to, make dua for you, the one that, does hajj on your behalf, the one that donates charity on your behalf. So Allah is telling you that you do not know. Verse 12 is the next verse, and it talks about, and if a man or a woman leaves neither parents nor children, but only a brother or a sister from their mother's side, they will each inherit 1/6. But if there are more than one, they will all share 1/3 of the estate after the fulfillment of bequests and debts without harm to the heirs. This is a commandment from God, and God is all-knowing and most forbearing. Again, this part talks about if someone does not leave any... Sorry, I'm missing a slide here that talks about spouses. And that is before this, where it talks about if your spouse, if you have left a if there's no children, then it's 1/8, right? So if your wife is the one that is deceased, you as a husband would inherit 1/2 of your wife's estate if she has no children. If she has children, you would receive 1/4. Like on the opposite side, if you are if the husband is the one that is deceased, the wife receives 1/4. If the husband has no children, if the husband has children, the wife will receive 1/8 of his estate. And so that's verse 11. Verse 12 talks about a kalala. Kalala is someone who leaves no ascendants, so no parents, grandparents, or descendants, no children, no grandchildren, but has brothers and sisters. They receive 1/6 if there are only 2 siblings, and if they are more than that, then they share in 1/3. There was a lot of questions on kalala. The Sahaba had a lot of questions on this. So verse 176 was revealed. And that is also missing. Verse 176 was revealed, and in that verse, Allah breaks down that only speaks about kalala, which is I think it's the next slide actually, where a man dies leaving only full siblings or paternal half siblings. If there's one sister, she receives 1/2. Two or more sisters receive 2/3. If there's both brothers and sisters, then the sister receives 1/2 of a brother's share. And if a woman dies leaving only brothers, he inherits everything. And Allah closes these verses by talking about tilka hududullah. These entitlements are the limits set by God. Whoever obeys God and his messenger will be admitted into gardens under which rivers flow to stay there forever. That is the ultimate triumph. But whoever disobeys God and his messenger and exceeds their limits will be cast into hell to stay there forever, and they will suffer a humiliating punishment. So those are honestly the 3 verses that talk about inheritance and talk about how do you divide an estate under Islamic law. Again, there's a lot of hadith, there's a lot of more information on, what do you do if those balances don't equal 100? There's a lot of things in there that, again, you would go talk to your sheikh, talk to your attorney who can come up with what that looks like. So up to 1/3 of your assets can be given to charity or to those who are not provided for as heirs under Islamic law. So a non-Muslim wife or child, adopted children, any special needs children that, are not able to support themselves. So you want to give them extra part, or anyone else for good, right? Inheritance is a means that Allah made for supporting one's nearest family, and you should not rob them of this opportunity or cause them to fall into poverty. What happens when you die? We've got Islamically, we've got under Texas law. So Islamically, borrowed things get returned to their rightful owners. Burial expenses come out of the estate. Debts to people are paid. Debts to Allah can be paid if you have written it in your will and up to 1/3 of your estate. And then you have your wasiyah, anything up to that 1/3 that you want to leave for charity or for other family members. And then the rest of the assets get distributed according to Sharia. Under Texas law, what happens is probate is what happens. Probate is a legal process where a court determines if there is a will, if that will is valid, and then distributes that person's property to any if he or she dies with or without a will, depending on whether the laws of this estate or according to the will. So they will appoint an executor, they will find any creditors and pay debts, including any burial expenses, last expenses, pay any income and estate taxes, and then distribute the assets according to state law. So when you talk about estate planning, there are 4 big parts of it, right? You're looking at your assets. That's what most people look at when they're looking at doing an estate plan. They're concerned about their assets. What is going to go to my family? How are they going to get it? But you also need to look at your family, right? What happens if you have minor children? Have you written out who you want as a guardian for them, or is the state going to decide? Because that's the alternative. If you have not written out that I want XYZ to be the guardian of my child, then the state will decide who is that guardian. Next is your comfort. If, God forbid, something happens to me and I'm in the hospital and I can't make medical decisions, who's going to make those decisions for me? I can write out, I want my dad, and then I want my sister, and then I want my child to make those decisions for me, right? I can give that guidance. I can also leave a living will that says, if something happens to me, I don't want to be put on a ventilator. I don't want a feeding tube, right? Those are my preferences as Lubabah, and I have written them out so that everyone knows, my doctors know, my family knows, this is what I want, so that people are not fighting, with, mom on the ventilator, and people are like, pull the plug, and other people are like, no, don't do it, right? So I can leave my wishes to make things easier for my family. And last is, if you are a business owner, if you have a business, what's going to happen to your business? A lot of us do not have proper business formation document, right? We go online, we fill out the Secretary of State form, and we do whatever it tells us, and then we think we're good. But if you have a partnership, do you have a buy-sell agreement in there? Have you guys agreed that if, God forbid, something happens to me, that my partner has a right of first refusal to purchase my half before it gets split out amongst my inheritors? Those are all things that we need to be thinking about and be creating, because again, we're told that we are a nation of iqra, of read. We are a nation of write down your contracts, make sure you have witnesses, but a lot of times we still don't. So those are all parts of estate planning. Some of the things to consider, again, we talked about a will, a trust, healthcare directives, financial powers of attorney. Again, the healthcare directives is me being able to say, if I am not well, I'm in the hospital, this is who makes my decisions, or a living will, which is what I want to happen. Financial power of attorney, if I'm incapacitated, allows me to appoint, I want my dad to be able to go, decide whether or not to sell my house, to rent my house, to go into my bank account, to pay my mortgage, to pay my kids' Islamic school tuition, right? Protecting your children and their property, considering life insurance, understanding if there's any tax consequences, covering any funeral expenses and burial arrangements, and then long-term care. If you don't have any of those documents, do you think you don't have a plan? You have a plan. It's called the Texas plan, right? And that is the probate process. And what that entire process looks like. It's a very long, lengthy, the quickest I've seen is 6 months, and I've seen it go above and beyond 2 years. Those payments for attorneys, those payments for your executor, all come out of your estate. So if you don't have a plan, rest assured the state of Texas has a plan for you, and it's not going to be in accordance with Sharia. So again, the government will appoint an executor of your estate who will divide the assets according to Texas law. That pay will come out of your estate. Your heirs will get more or less than they are entitled to under Sharia. Do kids inherit under the will? No. Minor kids, if you've got children who are under the age of 18, they do not inherit. The judge will appoint someone to manage their assets until they're 18. And then at 18, they will give them a check and be like, here you go, this is your inheritance, right? And for some children, that's great, right? There's some children who are, mashallah, very responsible, very financially savvy, and that works. But there's a lot of children who that does not work with, right? If you give my 16-year-old who's here with me a check, right? He might go and buy a car that he doesn't need at the age of 16, right? And so with a trust, I can put limitations. I can say, okay, Yusuf, at 21, you start getting income, right? So you can start playing with the money, seeing what it feels like to have it. You can waste the money. It's fine because you're not touching the principal, right? And if you need it for your education, if you need it for your living expenses, you can have it, but you have to go talk to your guardian. You have to go talk to your trustee, who is your khala, and have a discussion with hers, right? So Yusuf goes to his khala and is like, I need a car. She's like, yeah, Habibi, you definitely need a car. And then he's like, I want this $40,000 car that goes vroom, vroom. And she's gonna laugh at him and be like, here's a nice Honda Civic. You can drive that for the next 5-10 years until you're done with college. And then after that, you get a job, you wanna buy your $40,000 car, please go forward, right? So these are the things that you can think about when you are doing proper estate planning. One of the inadvertent side effects of not doing estate planning and not having all of our finances together and organized is feeding the Texas Department of Unclaimed Property. Every state has a Department of Unclaimed Property. You can actually Google it and look yourself up and see. You probably have money out there. I know I did. But Texas has a department that has over $6 billion sitting in it. And that's like if I had a bank account at Capital One and my family only knew about my Bank of America account, they don't know to go look at Capital One or at Wells Fargo or wherever else, right? And so what these companies do is that they will hold it for a while and then they will give it to the Texas department, be like, I tried to reach out, nobody reached out to me. And so this department now has over $6 billion of unclaimed assets. And so we don't want that to happen. So part of estate planning is sitting down and putting all of our finances together, right? We talked about blockchain this morning. We've got Muslims that have cryptocurrency, and I was sitting with a couple, and they're both, mashallah, very well-educated doctors, lawyers, and he's like, yeah, I've got crypto, and his wife's like, you have crypto? And yeah, I've got crypto. Did you not know? How do I access crypto, right? Those are all assets that if we are not talking with our families about where our assets are, this is where they will end up. I still have about maybe like 4 or 5 minutes left, inshallah. So I'll just talk about Texas law on separate and community property. Again, separate property is any property that is owned or claimed by the spouse before marriage or during marriage by gift or inheritance or certain personal injury claims. That is separate property. Everything else in the state of Texas is community property. What does that mean? That means if I've earned it while I'm married, both of us own it 100%, right? We own it 50-50. And so what that means is that all property, again, acquired by either party during the marriage is treated as community property and is therefore liable at being divided in half. Here's a simple example just so we can compare what Texas law versus what Sharia law says. Again, you've got a deceased, they have a spouse, you've got two parents, and you've got two children. What happens? Under Texas law, since the kids are all from the same marriage and there's a surviving spouse, that surviving spouse receives 100% of the community property. Anything owned during the marriage is now that spouse's. The spouse also receives 1/3 of any separate property the spouse has, the deceased spouse has, and the rest of that separate property goes to your children. And then the spouse also receives 1/3 of a life estate and 1/3 of your real property. So if you've got real property that you inherited from your parents, your spouse will receive a life estate for that, which means that they could use it while they are alive, and then it passes on to your inheritors. Compare that to and again, parents do not receive anything, and the kids only receive if there is separate property. Under Sharia, if the wife is the one that deceased, the husband gets 1/4 of the wife's estate since there are children. If it's the wife that is a survivor, she gets 1/8 of the husband's estate since there are children. Mom and dad each receive 1/6 of that estate. And then kids, if it's two boys, they receive 50-50 of whatever the balance. If there are two girls, they each receive 1/3. And if they are a girl and a boy, she receives 1/3 and he receives 2/3, right? He gets double what she receives. What do you need to create a valid will in Texas? Sound mind, above the age of 18, has to be in writing, has to be signed. That's it. If it's typed, then you also have to have two competent witnesses, at least 14 years of age, who sign the will in the presence of the testator. You cannot strike out portions of the will. So if you've written out a will and then you decide, I don't like this, I don't want this person to receive anything, and you strike it out, you can't do that in a will. You have to redo it. If you create a will, you have the power to give according to Islamic law as well as Texas law. Again, if you don't have a will, it falls to the rules of intestacy, which is just dying without a legal will, which again follows the laws of Texas. And someone will have to go to court to get a guardianship over your minor children or any adult disabled children, and you'll get no say in that matter. What is a trust? A lot of people are calling me now being like, we need a trust. So what does that look like? A trust is a legal entity that holds assets for many purposes, and it's designed to ensure that your assets are managed and or distributed to beneficiaries according to the terms of that trust instrument. So there's three different parties. There's the grantor, who's a person who creates the trust. There's the trustee, who is a person who controls and manages the assets. And there's the beneficiary. That's a person who benefits from the assets in that trust. That can be the same for all three people, right? So I am the grantor of my trust. I am also the trustee of my trust, and I'm a beneficiary of my trust. And that's okay. So again, you have all of your different assets. You put them into your trust. You have to fund your trust once you make it. You put all of your assets in the trust, and it is held there for your beneficiaries. And then again, there's a lot of advantages, including potentially reducing estate taxes, avoiding probate, definitely avoids probate, anonymity. Again, probate is a public process. So all of those documents are public. You can go and Google anyone's probate and you can see exactly what they left, who received it, who inherited it, when they inherit it. When you have a trust, that is a private thing. You just need death certificates and you can get assets managed and put into the name of the trust. You can control how the money is used and when the kids receive it, protect them from creditors, and then you can restrict beneficiaries' access to the funds. Again, you can put those limits as you want. There's a lot of different types of trusts, including irrevocable trusts, living trusts. Again, the benefits we've already talked about, right? You don't go through probate, you don't go through the court hearing, you don't have to hire a lawyer for probate, which in Texas you have to. And again, if you're incapacitated, we talked about financial and medical, having a financial and a medical power of attorney. That's what that does. Again, some things that you need to do to protect yourself and your family: designate a guardian for any minor children, designate a guardian for yourself if you're incapacitated, doing a durable power of attorney, which again allows someone to pay your bills if you're unable to, a medical power of attorney, again, a healthcare proxy lets you appoint who you want to make medical decisions for you, and a living will, which tells your loved ones how to proceed if you have a terminal issue. And then, can I talk about waqfs for just 30 seconds? Okay, jazakallah khair. Waqf endowments are a means of support for our fellow Muslims and Muslim organizations. If you have these waqfs set up, if you have these endowments set up, you don't have to have fundraisers, right? Because you have money coming from these endowments. They are, sadaqah jariyah, they're abwab al-bir. Historically, if you look at it, Muslims have been using them for thousands of years in very creative ways, right? Not just our masajid or our Islamic schools, but also our hospitals, our mental health facilities. Looking at, farm animals once they're old and unable to work, the farm, right? Where do they go? We used to have awqaf that were set up for animals to go, right? If a servant was working in your house and they broke something, there was a waqf where someone could go and be like, I broke my master's, pot or whatever, and they would give them something so it wouldn't come out of the worker's paycheck, right? This is what our Islamic history is, and this is what we need to go back to doing. We need to have these endowments. We need to support our Islamic institutions to make sure that all of society is taken care of, right? And that is the beauty of Islam. If there's any questions, again, my information's on there, my website's on there. Look forward to speaking to you, and jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.